So welcome. Thanks for joining us. This evening, we are kicking off with the first of 4 summer series, and essentially, what you can probably see in the background here is what we're going to be looking at over the next 4 series that we do. The whole idea is that we started something early on in the year. We asked a really simple question about what's the most challenging area for the PMO right now, and your PMO. And essentially what we got from it was that there was 4 that came out on top. So we did a poll over the space of a month and got over 100 responses. So, we thought, well, yeah, okay, that's pretty good. So out of the 4 was first on hybrid delivery, no particular order, hybrid delivery, benefits management, resource management, and PMOs working in a low maturity organization. So those are the 4 areas that people were having particular challenges with. And so what we decided to do at the PMO conference this year in both London and Edinburgh was to actually take the 4 areas, and we created this thing that's behind me, and we'll show you on the screen a little closer.
Let me just, if I stop sharing my screen, then that can see a bit more of you then.
Yeah, so there you go. So so this is a bit of it, and I'm going to move it around as we go. But essentially, it was about being able to actually really understand what, more detail of these challenges, especially this one. It's one we've been hearing all the time, over the last 2-3 years. And one of the things that's quite frustrating is trying to understand what the real challenge is, because we get this offhand, oh yeah, it's this or it's that. And actually what we wanted to do over these 4 sessions, focusing on these different themes and kicking off tonight, was actually get into more detail to actually really understand, but also, it's not just a talking shop of what's not working. It's let's try and understand how we can overcome some of these things. And actually, if there is no answers today or within our grouping, that's absolutely fine. But it's let's stop these things constantly being on the challenging list, and hopefully get to a point where there might be some solutions, or who knows, let's see where we get with it. So Eileen's going to be running this session in terms of facilitation, because it is interactive. So you'll see use chat. We always use chat on these sessions. You're encouraged to get involved on the chat and talk to people, where you're from and all that kind of stuff. You're also encouraged to talk and to come on screen, because this is, a summer series is more about interaction, and we want to get stuff out of you, and we want to have a chat, and we want to understand what's going on for you. And you'll find that there's other people that might be a similar position, or maybe a little bit more advanced than you. Who knows? Let's see. But I'm going to hand over to Eileen, and you're going to
take us through this. Yes. Now I've opened chat. There's a couple of people who've got chat, so just do kind of feel free to get that open. You'll see the conversation has already started. It's always nice to know where people are. Nice to see we've got somebody here for the very first time. For those of you who've chosen not to put your cameras on, that's fine. If you do fancy doing that, that's also lovely. We do like to kind of see some faces. We like hand gestures some of the times. What we really like is kind of big smiles and kind of contribution. And one of the things that I'm doing today is facilitating, which means I'm not necessarily going to be the person who's doing all of the talking. I'm going to be asking you questions and hopefully getting you to contribute. Now, we are going to, as we're all now kind of masters of using online tools, and we are going to be using some of the annotation tools within Zoom. So I just need to make sure that we've given you permission to do that. So what I want you to do is, if you go into your Zoom controls, let me just share the screen first, otherwise this won't work. Here we go, and you should all be able to see that on your screen. Now, in your menu for Zoom, you should see something called Annotate. Okay, so Annotate will allow you to do a number of things onto the screen. So it will either let you just do some stamps, and then you can put some arrows. You see, I've got some blue arrows going on the screen there. It'll let me put some love hearts on the screen. Absolutely will. It will let me draw shapes if I ask it to nicely. You've got to just figure out how to do this. So it'll let me draw shapes and colour them in. It'll let me rub my bits out. Won't let you do everybody else's. It will also allow you to do some texts on the screen. Okay, so just before we go any further, feel free to obliterate that page, but I just want you to check that actually you've got the ability to do some stuff on the screen. And I'd quite like to come on, Eileen. If I had actually I could play it on Spotify, but not the subject of see, Turai, we're all in it now with the excellent. So is everybody happy? Look, somebody's drawn houses. Excellent work. Everybody happy that they can do the annotation? Anybody struggling?
Sorry.
That's okay, no, okay. So that's why we're doing it here at the start of the session, so we can all join in later on.
So I'm a bit of a technology Luddite, and it's a project plan. So I'm used to Teams. I'm not really used Zoom, and I don't know where to find this. I've been looking in reactions and settings.
All right, so along from reactions and settings, have you got something that says annotate?
No.
Have you got 3 little dots?
Yep. That just says stop at incoming video.
Okay, what if you go at the top of your screen? What have you got on the top of your screen?
Nothing. Just everybody's images as a banner.
All right, then. So my question is: are you using the Zoom app, or are you using it via Explorer?
I had to come in through my browser. Yeah.
Right, then if you're using it through your browser, unfortunately, you won't be able to do the annotate functionality. However, if you put your comments in chat, yes, then we can make sure that your comments are still included in the conversation. I always forget that. Yes, if you come in through your browser, you don't have all of the functionality, but you can still get the chat. So you can join in that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So somebody's, Erin, you're on a Chromebook. But again, hopefully, as I said, if you kind of throw your comments into chat, we'll add them into the conversation. Excellent. Right. I just hate anybody to lose out. So I'm going to be really cruel now, because I just have to delete it. Otherwise, all the annotation continues on to the next page. The beauty is that we've got it recorded. So we have all of the lovely scribbles for posterity in the recording. So we've got, as Lindsay said, I have to need to turn my annotation off to make this work. Yes, as Lindsay said, we've got 4 of these comments boards. One today, one next Friday lunchtime, one on the 9th of August, and one on the 18th of August. So the dates are all available on the House of Paymo website, available for you to kind of sign up to. So this is a picture of the nice clean board that we put up. And interestingly, even though we had it up at our London conference and we had it up at our Edinburgh conference, we didn't actually get a huge load of input on this one, which I thought was really quite strange, because I would have thought that the vast majority of people in today's age, and it may be, you know, I sit in an echo chamber with kind of speaking to kind of people in a similar position to us. I would have thought most of us are in a position where we're doing hybrid delivery. So whether that be kind of partly within an individual project, but certainly from a PMO perspective, in an organisation where we've got partly being delivered waterfall style and partly using some iterative agile processes in our organisation. So before we kind of just general kind of observation, are we in an organisation that is, or is our role one particular element, or does that cover both? Now, I bet you John's gonna have to get himself a gin and tonic. He's taking his camera off there. Somebody suggested he's going to get a gin. That would be where my money is. So that's Rachel's influence. But any comments in terms of whether you're in a hybrid delivery or whether you are in purely waterfall or agile? So you can stick it in chat, somebody can talk, and we don't manage your mute. So if you just take yourself off mute and dive on in.
So I work for Reckitt's IT organisation, and we're actually going probably to a hybrid model. So most programs are probably run from a waterfall point of view, but the organisation's now moving to a product-based organisation where we'll see programs that are big transformational programs going into waterfall, but then also from a product-based point of view, moving towards an agile methodology.
Yeah.
So we're on that journey at the moment and going through that. So for me, this is quite interesting to get some learnings on, you know, how do we deal with hybrid ways of working.
Okay.
So we have something similar to that, I suppose, in that one of our business units wants to be product orientated and so on, like the last person just said. But also in our portfolio, we have kind of corporate functions type programs and projects. So finance, HR, changes of, you know, various support functions, and they're more traditional.
Okay. And is it their choice they're more traditional? Who gets to choose what kind of delivery method we use for our different initiatives?
I think they just haven't chosen to be agile. They, you know, don't know how much they thought about it really.
Or it's more of an absence of a decision than a decision.
Yeah, and you know, and maybe that's fine. I mean, waterfall gets a bad rap these days. It's not inherently bad, and of course, the reality is a lot of projects are a bit of both anyway.
Okay. John, I'm just going to bring you in on this kind of conversations. We've got Jonathan Ward with us, who does a lot of our agile training. Just curious, John, in some of the places where you're doing consultancy, where you're actually introducing agile into the organisation, are you advocating purely agile, or are you actually kind of really helping them go to adopt an agile where it's more appropriate, but kind of really helping them work through an agile environment? You're muted, John.
I hadn't done that until now, today. Everybody does it once a day, right? I would say there's a load of generic reports and stuff, and every year they produce something called the State of Agile report. And the State of Agile report says that agile projects deliver faster by about 60% and lower cost by about 40% and better quality by about, I can't remember the number, but let's say it's 30 or 5 or 40%. And I myself have cut, you know, project durations from 600 man days down to 200 and from 48 weeks down to 20. So I know that you can deliver it. So the question becomes not whether we're going to do agile or waterfall, but why would we do agile if you can get those, sorry, why would we do waterfall if you can get those sort of results? So the organizations I typically are working with are people that are migrating from waterfall approaches to agile, right? And some of those,
is that pure agile, John, or is it really a kind of a hybrid?
Well, I don't think there is a hybrid of agile. Some people might say, oh well, we've got to produce detailed specs, so they do big work up front, and then they're going into a development phase which they may use Scrum, but to my mind that's still waterfall, right? So agile is where you're using the intelligence of the team to define the plan and work to the plan rather than having a project manager produce the plan. And it's where you've got dynamic planning. So in agile we're planning as we go, whereas with waterfall we tend to plan up front. Those tend to be the differences.
Okay, so there's an interesting, I think that's a very interesting view, that as soon as you move to kind of doing things in an agile way, then we're actually we're out of waterfall and into agile.
Can I just chip in a sec there?
Of course you can.
It's a couple of things John said there. I've noticed happening elsewhere. People talk about agile approaches, but then they go on to describe something which is already in waterfall but done properly. So, for example, John said using the intelligence of a team to develop a plan rather than the project manager developing it. Well, to my mind, the team should be developing a project plan, not the project manager in isolation. That's thing number one. Thing number two, crikey, what was thing number two? I've forgotten thing number two. What else did you say, John?
What
was the second bit?
They don't
Planning in
produce a plan
increments.
up front, so they're planning in increments.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
the time boxes tend to be 2-week increments.
Right, but it's I would suggest that it's a relatively common approach to in so-called waterfall to plan at very low resolution in the long term, so in sort of like quarterly or monthly increments, and then fill in the detail as you go. So that to me sounds like standard traditional waterfall, anti-agile, not agile, done well, is what you just described as agile.
But is that not to me? Is that not the absolute definition of a hybrid delivery, where we use all of the tools, techniques available to us to do what's best for the project? So whether that's seen to be an old waterfall methodology or whether that's seen to be new, sexy agile, is almost irrelevant. We're just kind of, which to me has always been the job of PMO, is just kind of what's the best way, the most effective and efficient way to deliver a piece of work for the organisation.
I had raised my hand, but I'm not sure if the raise hand bit works in
oh
this
yes, I can
context.
see it. Yes, sorry, Lee. It's okay. In your against your light background. It was difficult to spot, but my apologies.
Ooh, okay, right.
You do what
okay,
Ken does.
so-
This usually works.
All right, yeah. Okay.
Physical hands.
Low tech, hey? Low tech.
Absolutely, yes.
So one thing that struck me I was looking at the canvas that you guys put up at the conference and looking at what's the real challenge. And I think we discuss sometimes, like we've been doing now, well, what's the difference, waterfall and agile? But the real challenge for PMO, maybe following from what Eileen is saying, is how do you enable, help, and report? Let's not concentrate on reporting, and report any delivery. Right? So that's fine. But I don't think, I still get all this confusion. If you go on LinkedIn, there's mighty battles between people going waterfall, agile, oh, it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Oh, we've done this for 50 years. Oh, no, we haven't. All of that. Following on from what John was saying, which I think is the key there, is that, yes, they are different. But to me, even though there are qualifications out there, strictly speaking, there is no such a thing as an agile project. And the reason for that is not that the two waterfall in the middle, is that they're fundamentally different ways of delivering. What we're talking about is delivery, hopefully delivery of value to the customer, but sometimes it's just delivery of bits that somebody else is going to use. That's okay, somebody has to do that. But a project management is a way of delivering. Delivery sits up here, project is one way. It's in that sense that you have to compare it to agile. It's not like it's two different types at the same level. It's not the same thing. And it's usually, agile is just one name. It's become popular because of the Agile Manifesto. Lean is probably more important. Whatever, you could go forever discussing it, but the key difference, if you're going to put the spectrum in place, at the one end you have predictive approaches, and at the other end you have adaptive approaches, right? That's the real difference. When you have predictive approaches, the things that PMO would control are the process for getting there. So you predict the future with your crystal ball, which hopefully is a very high price one because the future is really hard to predict, but you predict the future. You said it's called a plan. And then you slap change control on it, which means that reality has to bend to your will. So your reality will be what your plan said. And then you control it with change control. The difference when you have an adaptive approach is that you admit that the future is unpredictable. And then you probe and respond. You try something and you learn. Then you try something else and you learn. And you're constantly focusing on delivering value. That's not a project. It's nothing to do with project. project is predictive. We're talking about adaptive. But as a PMO, you can actually look at both. And hopefully we're talking more about enabling rather than reporting, as I said before. But what you concentrate on is the value. What value is being generated by those two activities? And there are some activities that are more suitable for projects. They always have been. You know, projects have a place and they will always have a place. In anything that is controlled by law, HR, procurement, finance, it's just going to be a project, really, because the way of reducing risk is via contracts. It's by using suppliers. You're doomed. You have to predict. You have to get people to sign up to something and then control it. That's your way of reducing risk. The way of reducing risk for adaptive things is to recognize that things are complex, so you have to sense and respond. Hence what John was saying about the 2 weeks. That's where you try to deliver value, usable stuff, fully usable to the end customer, not a little bit or a version or a requirement, the entire thing. Usable in 2 weeks so that you can see if that's what they wanted or not. And then you learn from it. So to me, the fundamental challenge that we have is that a lot of the time we're not clear on what the problem is. We're not even clear on what we do now and where it's it. We think that projects are it and they could be of various different flavors. No. Projects are projects. Other things are other things. So anyway, that's my starting point.
I love what you said, Lane. I think that you're absolutely right. And adaptive versus predictive is exactly the words that one uses. The other lens I'd like to put on this is the team. With the definition of a PMI of what a project is a project is a temporary organization that is designed to produce a specific outcome, or words to that effect. In Agile, what we're trying to do is to look to optimize that team. So compared to a project, what we do is we get a requirement, we assemble a team around that requirement. When the requirement is produced, we disperse the team. And that means we lose all the learning and all the ways of working and people working together and all the learning that's gone on with those 2 people working together, 10 people working together. With Agile, what we do is we try and keep the team together so that we can go from one activity to the next and incrementally improve performance. So this gives us an opportunity to improve the delivery process itself, which is impossible if we are constantly disposing of the team as a disposable organization. And I think this is mirroring the fact that people now believe that change is a constant, right? And change is continual.
I think just where that kind of conversation has led me to think is, we use some kind of phrases that almost kind of throw without kind of thinking carefully about what they mean. And when we talked about kind of hybrid delivery, my head, and I don't understand why everybody doesn't think like me. My view was kind of, let's think about kind of various kind of delivery methods. And I think what you've highlighted, John, there is very clearly is that when we're talking about kind of hybrid delivery, it isn't just about what steps are we taking in the delivery process, from a methodology perspective, whether that be from the project overall, or as Lane mentioned about the delivery of individual aspects of that. What you've also highlighted of, there's also other aspects around resource management and how we keep the teams and how we allocate work to people, and kind of the phrase that kind of I always align with the Agile is this autonomous self-managing teams element, which is, even if we agree with kind of some of the things that you take your camera off, Ken. There we go, Ken. Some of the things that Ken said around, kind of Agile is just really kind of waterfall done right, which, I'm kind of have often talked about before. So if we're thought about kind of what's the real challenge from an organization, if we're thinking essentially there are different ways to go from the start of a project to the end of the project. Obviously, one of the challenges we've really got is kind of language, and certainly some of the conversations that's happening in chat. about trying to kind of use some of these words in the presence of CEOs just can be a red rag to a bull and start conversations that are really unnecessary and unhelpful. From a PMO perspective, what is it we're actually kind of trying to do? What's the kind of thing that we're struggling with by the fact that we've got these so many? And we're not going to just kind of, we talked about the predictive and the adaptive as it kind of pulls apart, but essentially there's multiple stages and steps along that that continuum that we have to stop at. So what is the real challenge that we face as a PMO when we've got so many ways and approaches to deal with? So I've put language up there. Feel free to use your annotation tools. I want to let you put the boxes in the on the actual screen, but you'll see Lindsay's busy annotating the board. But there's some post-it notes down there on the right-hand side. You can't drag them, but you can write on them. If you've got any kind of, what's the real kind of thing we're trying to actually kind of address it. So happy that you kind of play with your annotation tools, add some more things in the chat, or just take yourself off mute and tell us.
I think one of the things that you were saying, Eileen, which is the different ways of getting from the beginning or the end of the project. That's my first disagreement. This is at the first point, because in truly hybrid organizations, you're not just talking about projects. You're talking about other ways of delivering that are not projects. So it's not how you start the project and you finish
so when you say
how you fill the sandwich is a completely different meal. The key challenge that I see is which is the language challenge, is how do you measure what you're being done? What is the benefit of what people are doing? Now, I tend to talk about it as value. Now, that is a loaded term because value is usually more related to lean, agile ways of working on product development rather than project. Projects don't talk about value, they talk about compliance. But it can be used with projects as well, and
so
you need the common factor.
Yeah, I just want to stop you for a minute, Liam, because I think this is a really interesting kind of point where we could kind of go off and potentially is a different discussion and one that I'm not happy not to shy away from, but just whether we want to kind of park that and have a conversation in a different way. So having delivered project management training for years and years and years now, we often kind of start off with that kind of conversation that there's a difference between business as usual and projects, because business as usual, cranking the handle, projects are delivering change into an organization. And going on, kind of where your conversation is now, and what John said not long ago about change being continuous, and we don't have this kind of, it's not kind of black and white like it used to be. A lot of the methodologies, kind of DevOps and SAFe are now saying, well, actually, we're not looking at just doing projects, which I think is where you're going, Lane, is we're actually saying is that it's a work management system for stuff that needs doing in the organization. It's almost kind of a workflow process. And so anything can kind of go in, we decide based on value, and I'm happy to use that term, based on value to the organization, where we spend our time and effort, which is the good old kind of standard portfolio management. How much time do we spend on business as usual? How much time do we spend on changes to make sure we've still got a business that's running, but is aligned to the organization, our changes, our environment, and all of the things that sit within that. So to me, I'm kind of taking a step back now and think, well, actually, what's the scope when we talk about hybrid delivery? Are we talking about the scope of work within an organization, or are we talking about the portfolio of change, where so many methodologies, so much best practice is based upon? Is that out the water now? Are we just saying, actually, the stuff that needs doing in an organization, and the delivery, the hybrid delivery, is recognizing how we do that based on the value to the organization? Go on, John.
I'm going to be really provocative, if I may.
I would like you.
And say that the point of Agile is so that change becomes BAU. Now,
Okay.
that means that instead of us looking at a team to do a specific task, what we're doing is looking at a value stream and seeking how we improve it, and then putting that into an improvement process so that the team actually is managing work depending on whatever source it comes from and aligning work with capacity. That's what they're basically doing, right? So this means that
But is that just that agile work, that improvement work? Do you still recognize a difference between business as usual? So, because in my head, there's potentially kind of three groups of work. There's the business as usual stuff, let's crank the handle. And typically we've said that crank the handle may include some continuous improvement, because not all of that stuff gets kind of thrown over into project land. And project land is really about looking at the kind of the big changes that need formal project management processes and techniques to look after it. So when you talk about this kind of, what you're applying Agile to, is it to continuous improvement in projects, or is it actually to the whole kit and caboodle of business as usual, continuous improvement in projects?
Right. So I think that, look, you get projects like, for example, somebody designing or producing the next iPhone or the next Tesla car or whatever it is, right? But once you've got that product, then Agile will do small change, incremental improvements.
Yes.
Right. So therefore, you do get a situation where it's small change, continuous improvement, which is what you're managing in the team. So that means that when you're setting out your Agile teams, right, you're looking at balancing new development work with what we call technical debt, which is things that we've got to do to improve the product, and things that we might want to do to improve the operational efficiency.
But that's not going to deliver you a brand new product or cover with the day-to-day work of paying suppliers, paying our staff, recruitment, etc. So
you don't get Agile teams paying recruitment.
No, absolutely.
But having said that, Eileen, if you look at something like Accelerate, which is John Cotter's book about 3 years ago, then he's talking about aligning Agile self-managed teams to things like payment runs and procurement and accounts payable and all of those sort of things. So there are people that are going in that space.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think to me, I'm just gonna put another up here is kind of scope. Okay, and a good friend of ours who's often on Flash Mob said a while ago, the problem is if the PMO get too good at organising stuff, we end up being asked to run the organisation. So to me, what's come out of this is actually we don't really know kind of. I'm not saying you don't know, John, but I'm saying as generally in terms of our industry, recognizing what the scope of hybrid delivery covers. We've got some disagreements in this group. So I can imagine if we've got disagreements here, there must be lots of disagreements elsewhere. So actually the scope of understanding what hybrid delivery covers. Anybody else want to add something to that?
I'll let somebody else go, but I do have something to say.
Anybody else got a view in terms of when we talk about hybrid delivery, do we understand what the scope actually is?
Are we talking about hybrid delivery, or are we talking about a PMO that's managing hybrid activities?
Well, the challenge of the organisation is hybrid delivery, and the PMO is there to facilitate delivery. So therefore, it's our problem to help the organisation do that.
I think that the hybrid delivery for me is not controversial. Really, the PMO needs to support all of the forms of delivery that are there. the points that I made earlier were just about some of the confusion before we get to the nitty-gritty, where people think that it's all about projects, and I'm saying it's not. It's about delivery, and projects are one way of doing it. But the problem for the PMO, the challenge, the thing to resolve is, given that there are many ways of delivering in the organization, and we can all have ideas as to what is better and what is worse, but it does depend on context. Given that today, where you are today, there are many ways of delivery in your organization, probably, and they will continue to change. How does the PMO add value to that? Well, they're all going on. And so what is the PMO doing? You know, because it's not doing only what it used to do when the only show in town were projects. There it was clear. You have plans coming out of your ears. You have little charts, Gantt charts that you can do. You can predict the future. You can look at your resources.
So so just clarifying, Lynn, when you talk about delivery, what do you mean by delivery? Because I'm now confused in terms of what you mean by delivery.
So
delivering value.
Delivery is, yes, ultimately it's delivery of value. So say if you look at an organization, so manufacturing did this a long time ago, right? But basically they found that the only way that you could actually really thrive was to have value streams. And that is something where right from the demand to the customer, you align everything that you need to produce that value to the customer. And then there are very many value streams in a company, and some of them may include paying invoices and all of that. And then the teams are aligned to the value stream, and they're long-lived, as John was saying. You don't fire them every time you produce something. They're always producing whatever needs to be delivered in that value stream to deliver that value. Now, that's pie in the sky for most of our organizations. I haven't worked in any organization so far that has achieved that yet. I know there are many, but I haven't worked there. So the challenge for the PMO, a normal PMO like mine, is, well, how do you manage what you really have, which is a soup of things? And sometimes it's appropriate to do projects, sometimes it's not. What is the common denominator? How do you find the metrics that when you look at portfolio and you look at your senior stakeholders, you can say, we're doing okay, we have some challenges, things are terrible, please help. How do you do that if it's always apples and oranges and cherries and pineapples? It's not the same thing. So to me, that is what we're talking about. Hybrid delivery means that there's a soup of delivery, the ways of delivering in the organization, and the organization continues to change. How do we add value as a PMO? By saying something intelligent about that mess on a regular basis.
So can I just kind of throw that open to the people who are here on the session about when you signed up for this and when we started to have some of this conversation, was the assumption, and I'm happy to kind of say it was my assumption, that we're actually talking about delivering projects, and I'm happy that includes business as usual improvements, so I'd excluded business as usual. Do people still think that the PMO and this conversation is about the hybrid delivery of projects, or the wider view of actually the value across the whole organisation?
Well, I assumed the latter, but that's probably because that's where I work. The portfolio. I'm in a portfolio role.
Okay.
I suppose
just want to ask a question then, Philip. When you talk about your portfolio, what kind of do you see that as a portfolio of change, a portfolio of projects and programs? How do you describe what your portfolio is to the organisation?
Well, we describe them as projects and programs, whether that's, there is some agile delivery within that.
And that to me still sits as projects and programs.
I'm sorry?
That still sits to me as projects and programs, whether it's been delivered in agile or not. So yeah,
so I think my view is that and coming back to what Lane just said, I don't think so you have to be able to explain to your executive how you're doing, and if you're going to say how you're doing, that's got to be in relation to something. Okay, it's no good saying, well, we've done 3 of those, because 3 might be brilliant or it might be rubbish. Okay, you've got to have some sort of target. So your executive are going to be interested in a longer term target. What are we going to deliver this year or in the next 2 years or whatever? Where are we going to be? Are we going to have this fancy new product or a new level of revenue or something? Now, there'll be lots of steps below that, and maybe we don't know exactly how we're going to get there yet. And perhaps that's where agile comes in, or waterfall, or other things. But I had a point I was going to say and I've forgotten it now. I don't think the executive, I mean, certainly where I don't think they care, to be honest, whether the programs are delivered by which methodology. I don't think they get into all the minutiae of that. What they're interested in is, are they getting closer to the targets that they've set the business? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I think that's great, Philip. I'll just, Eileen, I think let's go to this. What is the real challenge? And I think if you look at the waterfall world, traditionally, the PMO is the center of excellence for project management, right? And the challenge to the PMO is most PMOs have got to start to learn with the same level of proficiency, the different techniques that are associated with hybrid delivery, like continuous delivery, like Scrum, like Kanban, and so on, to be able to advise teams. The other thing that the PMO tends to do from a added value perspective is to be able to quality or assure, do some assurance and deep dives on the activities. Now, Agile, if we're perfectly honest, waterfall projects produce a plethora of documentation, and a lot of the assurance activities that PMOs do is basically saying they've done this document, they've done that document, so therefore the project should be in good health. And the fact is, with Agile, what they've got to do is get a lot closer to the delivery to check that what the team is producing is actually what the stakeholders need. So that's the second thing. The last thing is executive reporting. And I think the problem with Agile and continuous delivery is that we, as a PMO, tend to try and roll things up to summarize. And actually, by rolling stuff up with Agile work, we actually don't allow the senior execs to understand where the problem areas lie. So I think Agile forces a PMO to become a lot closer to the work and forces the PMO to actually add value in terms of saying, this is the, we've got 50 projects in this portfolio, 45 of those are in green status. Mr. Senior Execs, you don't need to look at that. But we've got 3 which are in amber and 2 which are in red. And these are the projects to look at. And in that sense, we're not rolling up and summarizing the risks across the portfolio. What we're doing is guiding the executive decision making in a much more pragmatic way.
Right, so I've just put a thing on. So what I'm hearing in terms of kind of what the real issue is, and I think that was I'm giving you credit for this, Philip. So other people can be a bit peeved, but it's about having some kind of metric to demonstrate progress against. That strikes me. So whether from a lane's kind of we're delivering value, to kind of John saying, we need to be able to kind of demonstrate we're actually kind of moving forward. We don't necessarily have a single metric that we're trying to. And is the challenge then we're trying to apply some of those things we've learned in our historic waterfall in terms of trying to deliver and be, as you say, John, being able to kind of roll this up to have a nice little kind of, we've got 3 key milestones on a plan and ding, 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 if we roll up, we're delivering them. Is so to me, what I've taken from this and happy to have it challenged is that when actually we just need some way of demonstrating whatever we're delivering and however we're delivering, we're making progress at the right speed and in the right direction.
I'm not sure that it's about the roll up. I think
No, I'm not suggesting it is a roll up. I'm just saying, we need some way to feed back into the organisation.
So if you take something that we talked about before in this group, and John McIntyre did a brilliant session on that, you can use things like OKRs, which are very flexible and they're context dependent and they're not cascaded. It's a matter of aligning. So therefore you can do different things for product development as you would do for projects and as you would do for continuous improvement, such as a data center refresh or an infrastructure refresh, things that are very, very different in nature. And the nature of them is that ultimately funded differently in our companies. Most companies are still organized around an annual budget cycle. Some people now believe that's quite crazy and that they go beyond that, but most of them are. And therefore, there's a difference there in how they're organized, but the OKRs could be catering in terms of what the goal is, what the business dial is it moving in the right direction? And then you have all your measures below it. And that's where you get close to the work, as John is saying, for the things that are being lean.
In my naive mind, is that not going back to the old kind of equivalent of the balanced scorecard?
No,
Or
no,
something
not at all.
akin to that? Something completely
No.
different?
So in the balanced scorecard is derived from the strategy. So it's done up front. The balanced scorecard is a very predictive tool. And it has targets, and targets are just anathema to working properly. OKRs are very, very different.
You throw that in as a statement that most people will kind of, well, certainly I kind of was surprised, is that targets is an anathema to working properly.
Yeah, we can talk about that some other time. So you can disregard that I said that. You can actually talk about call them business dials. Say if you have a dial that is going to green or to where you want to be, the business, the organization, the service provider, whatever it is, knows when things are going well and when they're not going well, or they should do. And they have a means of saying this bit of our organization, this service is working well or not. How do you link, and OKRs is a good way, how do you link what you're doing, whether you're working in product development or in projects or in programs, to that dial? How does it make it go greener or not? Does it move that dial or not? And those are the things that as the PMO we need to identify, and there's no single answer. There is a way of working, but it depends on the context. It depends what your dials are. But it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about it than thinking, am I on time? Am I on budget? Am I on scope? That's just the process that you're using to deliver what you're delivering. You have to find a more direct way of seeing whether you're having an effect on what the company and its customers or the service and the stakeholders really care about.
So
and there are ways of doing that.
As a challenge, Lena, and just there's been some interesting stuff that's kind of happening on the messages, and I'm conscious we've had a couple of people already kind of drop off the call, because what you're talking about is philosophically, absolutely, I don't think people were going to disagree with. On the ground, can I suggest that most people are actually just struggling with how do we deliver stuff, and how do we choose from the various tools and techniques? How do we get a tool to support us in doing that and collecting all of the oodles of data which we're now meant to use for data-driven decisions and evidence-based decisions? So interesting in terms of, I see where kind of you might be, but is that really where we think the vast majority of people are actually kind of working with on the ground? Because it doesn't feel like that from the people we mix with on a day-to-day basis. It's much more about actually what method do we want to use, what tool have we got to support us, how do we set the metrics in place, which is back to the kind of what John delivers for us for a course for a lot of people who are down there.
Yeah, that's a good chat. I mean, I was actually just looking through the chat as well. I saw what Rachel and Kate's conversation a little bit further up with a nice little Graham sandwich, if that helps you see where it is in the comments. But I think I was interested in this idea of doing agile by stealth and sort of understanding why that is, and then this balance of if we're doing things agile, the perception in the senior management that they might be sort of losing visibility, and how you sort of balance and get from that as well. And that sounds like a fun place to talk. And you're absolutely right. I was worried a little bit earlier that the philosophical conversation is great, but if we come out of tonight with some philosophical arguments and a conclusion that roll-up reporting is a big issue, that would probably be the give everybody outside of our little PMO world the perception that PMO is exactly what they always thought it was. We're the ones that focus on roll-up reporting over practical real-world issues. So I don't know what. Rachel, what's the Are you happy to tell us about the stealth things? I'm interested. I'm very down with doing everything by stealth if it gets things delivered fast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was as well, kind of what Kate was saying as well. We're in a very, very strange place in the NHS at the moment. We've just come out of a period, post-pandemic, where we've got a workforce on its knees. We're trying to recover, and there are a lot of occasions and instances where things that we've been mandated and asked to do nationally work very well in an agile approach. We've got fixed time scales, we've got fixed resources, things have got to be done to X cost by the 31st of March. But we've got a workforce that really don't want to hear about another methodology and another language and another load of terminology, so literally the way we're portraying it to them is we're talking about, a picture of a flower, and basically we take a box and we break it into quarters. And we say, well, how about trying this approach? So instead of to define exactly what all parts of that flower look like now, and that's what we're working towards, we don't know what we need to do service change. We don't know quite what we need to do to bring that waiting list down. So let's have different iterations of the flower. So we do a bit of like how we think the flower might look, and then we go, well, is that working? Well, no, okay, then we'll change it, and then we'll come back with another iteration of the flower, or how the waiting list process might look. So they don't actually realise that we're moving them away from waterfall into a more iterative approach, because if we came at them with language and new ways of doing things, it would be the straw that breaks the camel's back. That's
Okay.
us. That's the reality of our situation.
Okay, so it's about actually kind of doing what is already been kind of predetermined as a project. It's about how do you do that?
How you get there.
Yeah. And so it is back to that kind of just how do we use all of the tools and different ways without introducing kind of new language into the organization, and just doing so interestingly. So I just want to kind of go back. So we're talking about incremental change. John McIntyre, you were talking about your love of doing things by stealth and introducing them incrementally. John, I know you work with organisations and are actually employed not to do them by stealth, but to do them kind of very explicitly, as a kind of as a complete change in the way of working. So interesting in terms of kind of where people are in terms of that that conversation about where most organisations are. Is it because we're actually trying to do it by stealth? Is that causing us a problem, or do we see it that's the only way we can do it because actually doing the big bang approach would be kind of more of an obstacle to us?
So if
is the Big Bang a little bit of a, not quite a myth, but a misnomer? Because I mean, I've certainly worked on plenty of projects in the past that have not been billed as agile. They've probably been, more akin to waterfall, but not everything necessarily happens on the same day. They're quite often divided up into phases, or different things are released at different times. I do struggle a bit with this sort of very binary idea that it's either one thing or the other. I was quite interested in what Rachel was saying about having a fixed end date. Was it March or something? A fixed end date where you've got to do certain work that you've been given. So it sounds like there's work to be done. There's a definite end date, and by hook or by crook, you will try and get that work done. But I guess if the day comes and not everything's done, then so be it. No, I think that's what Rachel was saying.
Yeah, that's quite a good summary of that, Philip. So, but it's because it's very politically driven, and that's just the situation that we're in.
And it was interesting, and I know people kind of call on this because I've used it several times before. My first big technical project that I worked on was the privatization of the gas industry, and we had a end date set in statute, and we had some very definite things that needed to be doing, with some bits around the edges that we could work out how we did. And we got halfway through the project and realised you wouldn't believe the conversations we had about chocolate wrappers around databases and what have you. But we actually realised that the solution we were going to have actually wasn't going to work, and we had to introduce a kind of a double set of processing to actually do the functionality that we were needed. So, you know, kind of some of this, even though we say we've been doing waterfall for years and Agile's new, actually some of these hybrid approaches have been around for a long time, and good project and program management has always looked at using some of the various kind of tools and techniques. But I absolutely take on Ken's comment that actually what Agile has done is it appears to mandate what was previously just seen as good practice that wasn't always followed.
So I'd say that there's, my mum used to say there's nothing new in this world, right? And the actual grandfather of Agile, anything Agile, whether it's Lean Agile, whether it's Scrum, whether it's anything, is actually Deming. And his work in the 1950s and 1960s tends to be the source of all the Agile practices and so on. So again, nothing new, right? But one of the things I'd like to say to you, talking about, John was talking about going through stealth. What tends to happen is when a company goes on an Agile transformation, there tends to be 3 stages. The first stage is an informal experimentation stage. It's informal, people trying things, stuff being done under the covers. And typically there's 2 results from that. Either, and it's a real pain in the side for the PMO because they're breaking all the rules and they're not doing things the way we traditionally were and so on. 2 things happen. Either somebody steps on them and they actually come back into line, or somebody says, you know what, there's something in here, we're doing things faster, we're doing things better, right, now let's do it on a wider scale. And it's at that point that the PMO needs to come right into the front, because what they're talking about is changing the traditional methodology, which the PMO owns, and introducing new ones, which the PMO needs to support. So that's where the big step is. And typically senior management or head of technology or somebody has made that decision to say, let's go Agile. They might do it in a small group and experiment again, and then go wider or whatever. But it's in that second piece where you've got a lot of the issues around what are the challenges for a PMO, where you've got some projects doing waterfall and some projects doing Agile and some projects doing continuous delivery. That's where the problem lies once you get out of that informal stage and into the we're going Agile. And at that point, you're going to need to measure what are the benefits, you know, all the people that are being trained, is that investment paying off, and so on.
So interestingly, which is I just in terms of kind of what Graham's just put up there in terms of this kind of creative management and working kind of how we're going to do things. I'm just conscious where we're still at the kind of the first discussion slide of this, and some really look at her face in terms of kind of what is there. And interesting in terms of this, I go back to kind of my assumption about this was really about organizations who are in that space where we've got lots of different ways of doing things and we've got some kind of real challenges. So I am going to jump to the next slide. Apologies, I'm going to delete all of our lovely annotations. You know, we've got them all just so they don't kind of carry through. But in terms of the, you know, kind of the next thing we were thinking about is, you know, if we think about kind of hybrid delivery, as in kind of, and I'm going to use Graham's term here about this kind of creative management of doing stuff that the PMO has oversight over. What's our dream outcome? What would be our kind of, we wake up and think, do you know, I'm going to really enjoy going to work this morning because we're going to deliver loads of stuff. We're going to deliver it well. What does that look like in terms of our dream outcome? So feel free as ever to the creative management office. You can't do CMO because that's change management office. They'll have your guts for garters, John. feel free to kind of join in the conversation, stick it in the on the post-it notes. What are kind of the dream outcome? And Rachel, interestingly, particularly, I'm going to direct this question particularly, what's your dream outcome?
My dream outcome would be that the execs or a project come to us and say, what's the best way to do this PMO? And we trust your knowledge, we trust your experience, and whatever you say is the right way to do this is what we need to do.
Okay, so that's becoming kind of the real trusted delivery partner, which is what we've talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And our value is in our knowledge and our expertise and our support to help them do that. Okay.
I'm going to add that in just in case Lindsay misses it somewhere in her kind of catching up. But I do think that's an interesting one in terms of it almost kind of, we don't care what the challenge is as long as somebody trusts us in order to kind of work out the best way for the organisation. Okay, so that kind of gets us to the point where we're deciding on kind of how and what it gets done. Any other dreams for as we progress through that, as we've got any challenges with delivery as we kind of go through, because even if they've trusted us to be the delivery partner and we've picked the best way to do that, what else do we need? What are the rest of our dreams to make it all work swimmingly? Lindsay's writing in all of the answers that we haven't spoken about yet. We're watching you writing all of that in.
I have. I've got I've put in a dream outcome, but I've also put in the moonshot about the creative management office. I like that. And I was just looking at Lane's here, which I believe is different to the one about the PMO being trusted. Yes, I think that's the. So I'm doing it live. I'm doing it live. Go on, carry on.
Anything else in terms of kind of what so interested, John, from a team's perspective and the people we've got working on the project, what would be our dream in terms of those? Because I have to say, regardless of the methodology that we use, I often purport that the greatest characteristic of anybody who's working on a project team is availability. Skills and knowledge irrelevant, availability, bang, you're in there in the project team.
I think might sound really odd, but happiness.
Okay.
What you can find is that people, because they are involved with their work, people that are involved in self-managing their activities, are generally a lot happier than people that are being told what to do.
Yeah.
And
who's it who wrote MOP? Craig Kilford, that'd be him. When he goes and does a piece of work, he often measures the happiness quotient about when he started to when he's finished his consultancy assignment, on the basis that's a metric. So you're not alone in that, John, in terms of happiness.
No, we're doing that right now in the bank I'm working at, right? They've got a very well in a lot of organizations, and Rachel will be in tune with this. A lot of the organizations, people are walking out of the door. Attrition is a major issue, and it's so significant that, you know, about a fifth of the workforce I've got less than a year's tenancy in where I'm working at the moment, and so therefore anything that you can do to think about staff retention and keeping the skill sets is a huge benefit and of huge potential for the medium-term future of the firm. So
especially in today's climate.
Yeah. You know, we're talking about the what's it called, the Great Resignation in the US. 60 million people resigned. Okay, that's a 40-odd% of their workforce, right? And it's not just in the US, you've got it elsewhere. And the predominant reason why quoted as the people designed was because of culture. And that all comes back to command and control culture, people being told what to do. So people are post-pandemic are looking for a much greater say in what they're doing, how they're spending their life, and the non-financial benefits of working in an organization.
Interesting. So that's what happiness is definitely in there. What about, so and funny enough, because where I was going, John, I'm very old school, obviously, in terms of my next question about what do we see in terms of governance and control. So you've talked about kind of the happiness of the team. I'm not sure it's diametrically opposed, but certainly in terms of having a relationship to the level of governance and control that the executives might feel they need, not just they want, that they feel they need on key developments and delivery that's going to impact the success of the organization and the organization going forward. What's our kind of our dream outcome from a governance and control perspective? There isn't one.
So
can I just pick up Rachel? Sorry, John, I will come back to just because I was, in terms of from your executive's perspective, what do you where do you think your executives might want? What would they see as kind of success and being in a much better place from kind of just doing stuff with this wonderful PMO, working out how to do things for us, and happy staff who stay with the organization?
If I was brutally honest about our execs, what they want is for everything that we've been mandated from the Department of Health that we have to deliver is going to be delivered. If we've got to save money against a deficit, that we're going to hit it. If we need to reduce waiting times, that we're going to hit it. They're totally focused on the end result and what boxes they need to be ticking when they get held to account. Okay. They don't care about the how. They only just care about are we going to get there?
Show me the money.
Yeah.
Okay, John. Sorry, I rudely interrupted you.
Nothing. I was coming back on the concept of governance and oversight, and I think my dream outcome would be that senior management realize that self-managing teams means teams without managers. Okay, and it means that we're trusting people. So it means that our governance process is more about enable and trust and audit rather than tick box, review and approve. So
is that what you were talking about? Because Glenn's put in the comments there, more governance, less control.
More governance, less control. No, I don't think that's the way I was going. I was going, there is probably more. Yeah, if you're saying that the governance is operating at the team level rather than at a managerial level, yes, you're right.
Okay. Right then, I'm going to try and do one more, at least one more. We've got a
add one, please. So this dream outcome, I still see it. The questions is okay. So in my portfolio, I've got some things being delivered by agile, iterative stuff. I've got traditional waterfall stuff going on. How do you tell the execs what's going on, because you're comparing apples and pears?
But I think that's what, you know, don't think we've discussed the minutiae what that means, but I think what we've said is that based on kind of Rachel's answer, is that through the team delivering and being happy in what they're doing and the way that they work, we've got a way of being able to tell the senior exec that things are on track. And that goes back to kind of what the main purpose is, that they can see that they're going to get what's required. I don't think we can ever guarantee everything's going to be delivered, but in terms of certainly being able to be clear, and I think, you know, that some of the old basics of being able to provide confidence that delivery is going to happen is what that looks like.
We've got a system where we've got a portfolio tool that we've put in based on dynamics, so it's fairly flexible using all the Microsoft bits. But the key answer to what you're saying, Eileen, is based on risk. So it's the risk against the benefits. not against the end date or whatever. It's the risk against the benefit. So if the benefit is reducing waiting times, how is it looking with the work that you've done? Is that risk being mitigated, or is it not going well? And do you need help? Which goes back to what John was saying, the governance within the team. The function of management is more servant leadership rather than control and command and control. And that works really well. It's simple. You can summarize apples and oranges because apples and oranges have benefits, and risk is well understood. We're good at benefit and risk. So there are ways of doing this where you can get hybrid things working, and you can measure their delivery by the risks to the outcomes.
I agree with you, Lena. I'd like to just come back on apples with oranges, Eileen. I don't think that you ever in a hybrid environment compare apples to oranges. And the reason is, with agile teams, what you're looking at is, are you delivering the value that you set out to achieve, right? Now, that's not a bad measurement for waterfall delivery either. The fact is, traditionally, what we've done is we've reported cost variances, schedule variances, and to be honest with you, and if we're perfectly honest with each other, we've forgotten about the benefits and have we delivered value, right? Now, agile, what we need to do if we're going to be doing this at a hybrid level is actually swing the waterfall measures round to agile metrics and actually start to ignore, to a degree, the slippages on time and budget, and start to measure and report value created.
Yeah. And I know I had that conversation when I introduced project management into an organisation, probably about 13, 14 years ago now. And the chief exec wanted to meet with the project managers on a monthly basis. And I did say, what on earth do you want to do that for? Who cares what the projects are doing in terms of delivery? What you need to be doing is meeting with the sponsors and asking them, am I still going to get my benefits? When you said I'm going to get them, and leave the project sponsors then to have the conversation with the delivery teams and their business as usual teams to say, is it actually going to be, is it all working as we anticipated? Because I've committed to the chief exec that I'm actually going to make some savings or making some changes to the way we work. So I think that's a really kind of interesting point about kind of moving that forward.
Eileen, if I may just add a little bit on this one. So I really liked the when we stopped focusing on the management and talked about the teams for a second and spoke about happiness. I absolutely agree with John's comments on actually the people working in the teams want to be happy. And I think there's two things that play a key part in that. One is cognitive load, how much we're expecting them to keep in their heads. And the other one is the context switching, and both of those go hand in hand to a certain extent, right? But if we can, whether we're organizing things by creating a temporary environment in a Prince 2 sense of a project, or whether we are taking a sort of a scaled agile approach of getting people into value streams where they have a clearly defined set of products that they work with, and we're limiting their context switching and dependencies that way. I think both of those can work pretty well to give you the outcome of happy people, as long as you get it right. And if you get it wrong in either way, it can be really bad. I've seen organizations advocating the kind of the Spotify model of agile, where you end up with teams that you're keeping the team together because that's the important component, and we don't want to break teams up. But the organization's changing around it, and you end up with teams that have so many dependencies on everybody else that they end up broken because they're context switching and managing dependencies all the time. And you see the same thing on traditional waterfall projects. If you don't genuinely carve out this temporary environment for people, and they're still doing 2 different day jobs plus the project plus another project, that's both of those are the same sort of outcome, whether it's agile, waterfall, or old or new, however we're defining that. But I think for the individuals that get the work done, or the teams that get the jobs done, I think they suffer the same thing on both ends. And I was trying to draw it very badly with the annotation, but it's interesting. We've basically got the the management, as we just said, they don't care how we do it. They don't care about our project management metrics and what we do. They just want the outcomes. You've got the teams, and certainly with developers, they're often very, very outspoken about this. We don't care about the project management or anything. We just want to get on and we want to put our headphones on, and we want to code, and we want to go home. And then we've got this fun world in the middle where we're just trying to work out what's the best way of mapping those two things together. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, I think.
Which actually kind of happily leads me on to the next section of our board, which is what have we tried that didn't work, and what are the biggest things kind of stopping our success? So some experienced people here in terms of, interesting again in terms of for people who've kind of been more progressive in this. So what do you see in organizations where people have tried things and they've just kind of been, you know, kind of, they may as well have not done anything because they've actually taken a larger step back than any step forward?
Well, I think somebody mentioned earlier, you know, the language that used, and people spend absolutely ages arguing about the difference between benefits and value and this and that, and, you know, perhaps that time could be more productively used. So I think, you know, language causes an awful lot of angst. I think the other thing I've seen in some organisations that I've been involved with is sort of announcements from very senior people that from now on everything will be done using Agile, for example, everything. And of course that produces a you know, a bit of a pushback in some cases where it can't be done and so on, and it just discredits that announcement and undermines the enterprise, I think.
Okay.
So it's not the fact that they're lordly announcements, it's just looking at what's being written there. It's more the fact that they're not desperately intelligent announcements, shall we say.
Can I say uninformed announcements?
Yeah, I think so. You know, one size fits
I
all.
don't think, to be fair, I don't think it's just uninformed announcements. I think it's also aspiration or kind of stated aims. I've put targets. So, you know, the government kind of did, there was not the government who came out several years ago and said 80% of all projects by the year, whatever, will be delivered using agile methodologies. Yes, we're completely uninformed without any understanding about what was going to be in the portfolio of change, how it was going to be, you know, kind of what was the most appropriate method.
Yeah, that's an example of a target that just doesn't mean anything.
Absolutely. Well, and just no view as to kind of whether it can actually be possible.
Well, I find it fascinating why those things don't work for us when they do for others. You can make bold aspirational statements like that when you're talking about your product. So I will talk to my team and say we're aspirationally going to have 80 new clients next year, and it's tangible and it's exciting, and we might not get to that, but shooting for that sounds awesome. I think people then try, but also it gives people in the organizer and senior managers coming out with those very, very sort of inspirational, directional, clear steer, this is where we're going statements, get rid of a lot of ambiguity in the organization. They get rid of a lot of the blockers, all those kind of things. People that are saying, well, I'm not sure this is the right way. Actually, management have said really clearly this is what we're doing, and it unblocks things and allows us to move. The what's weird is that doesn't, or maybe it's not weird, it doesn't work for how we decide to organize projects though. It just seems.
It's not because there's a disconnect there. So when you say that to your team, John, they look to you as the person who's actually going to be making that happen. So yes, we need everybody to work on it, but you as the kind of the leader of your organization, they'll look to you and say, I'm sure John can make that happen. When senior managers say it, it's not as if it's been, if the PMO said that, supported by senior management, I think that's a very different message to senior management saying that, and the PMO and the rest of the people who are involved in delivery thing. And I've never been consulted in this, and I don't even see any way of doing that. And there's nobody at that point who can actually articulate how and why that's going to be done. So if somebody said to you in your group and said, John, how are you going to make that happen? You'll be able to, I would expect you to be able to say, we're going to be doing this, 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 and this, and I'm expecting this, this, and this. The people who tell me if I'm wrong, Philip, but when we're talking about people who are making these types of statements, they can't answer those questions. And they look to the PMO and they go, well, that's news to us and we're going to have to work it out for you. So there's a disconnect with the people who are making the statements, and there's a blinding gap between the people who are going to have to actually make that happen. Would that be that's when I'm talking about those kind of announcements, that's my view.
I think that probably is a factor in a lot of cases. I think there's more to it than that. I don't know, I need to think about it more. It's got me thinking now. There's something that sort of says those kind of statements work well for a sort of strategic direction in terms of marketing, sales, what we're going to be manufacturing, launching in a new market, those kind of things. I don't think they work well for organizational design stuff. I'm not quite sure why, but they just, my experience is they don't. I'm just trying to work out.
You've written a comment there about the Apollo program, Graham. Are you saying there's an example where we made some decision, but we didn't know how we were going to get there, and people actually eventually did? Graham? Graham, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot I was unmuted. Yes, that's exactly what I thought John was referring to there. That kind of high-level mission specified from above, and then they gave people beneath that the freedom to create the way that to achieve that. And I think that's a wonderful example of where I think the term these days is called mission economics, where you set the mission and then give the people who have to implement it the freedom to figure out how to do it within, whatever constraints you might have.
And that's why it doesn't work for organizational design or project management design, because you're not making that statement and then letting people decide how they're organizing it. You're kind of not making a direction statement. You're just telling them how to organize themselves.
Exactly right. Yes, it needs,
isn't it? Despite it sounding the same or being with the right gravitas, and it is the opposite, isn't it?
Yes.
You just nailed it, Graham. Thank you. That was, yeah.
How long does it take, do you think, for people who are been working in waterfall environments for a long time, and then now there's the agile stuff coming in, there's different ways to deliver stuff? How long do you think it takes to change a mindset? With all things being equal, i.e. an organization really wants to make it happen, so we're gonna make sure you're well informed, you're going to be knowledgeable, we're going to train you. How long do you think it would take?
Well, I think it depends on the situation you're in and what actually issues you're dealing with. So you may find that you're in a situation where you look at this agile stuff and think, gee, that's perfectly good for what we've got to do right now. It probably won't work for the other thing we're doing over here, but where there's a need for something like that, I think people will be able to adopt it very quickly. I don't think it necessarily means sort of a huge number of months of introspection and review and analysis. You just look at the situation you're facing. How do we get through this? Well, there's this tool, this tool, this tool, this tool. Okay, let's try that. And you just do it.
Well, what I want to do, just kind of building on that, Graham, I'm just going to clear all of these drawings. And I'm just going to go forward a couple of slides because I do want to get something. We've got last kind of 5 minutes. We've got a couple of things that are what people have tried that have helped. And we'll kind of make that available to you just to read. There's not much necessarily on there. So this was I was really surprised that this is completely blank. So people didn't have in their back pocket a list of things that they were looking to try, which kind of gives me the impression that they're out of ideas. So just in the last kind of couple of minutes of this, there is one more thing I want to talk about after this, but it's just interesting in terms of if people are in this kind of situation where, and I'm sorry, Rachel, we're going to use you in Rachel's, a situation like Rachel's, where you know, we're embedded really to kind of waterfall it only in terms of, because that's what people know and understand. We're trying to move to different ways of working. What is it that people can actually kind of try to do this by stealth? Do we advocate the kind of the philosophical kind of conversations in the organization in terms of kind of, you know, kind of about delivery? Do we all employ John Ward to come in and kind of, you know, kind of create agile environments in our organization? What are the things that we can try, and what might be some of the things that block us and stop us from moving forward? Now, you can't be out of ideas at this stage in the game, right? This is the bit that people really want from a group like yourselves. Okay, so we've got kind of a direct senior stakeholder influencing. And is that going to be done by the PMO lane? He says, desperate. I wish I could unmute you, but I can't. Not within the
Yes, no, I just said yes. That was very short.
Okay. And does that, just so going back to kind of, going back to what Rachel said at the beginning, does that only really work if your PMO people have some credibility in the organisation already?
Yeah, that helps an enormous amount. But it can also be done on the back of something that somebody else mentioned. Sometimes successes, even small successes, carry a lot of weight. So if you do it on the back of a success, then that helps too. I must admit it's quite hit and miss. I've tried it in some organizations. There was one organization that John Ward knows about, and I was talking to the head person, and he actually fell asleep in the middle of my presentation, which says a lot about me, but still, sometimes it just doesn't work. So it's no magic bullet.
Okay. So I'm going to put share successes far and wide. That's kind of what we've talked about. Any other comments in terms of things that people can try?
So I would say there is as much, don't focus on the team, but focus on the managers around the team as much as the team. So don't simply focus on the team, because I think the true challenge with any organization adopting agile is actually not at the team scrum Kanban level, but actually at the roles and responsibilities change that you need to have in order to make that happen.
So it's about making sure that the governance structure in place provides the right environment for delivery.
For the teams to thrive, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good one. Okay, I'm very conscious that our time is about run out. Now, one of the things that we just wanted to understand is kind of, what do we do next? Hold on, I just need to kind of clear all of the annotation. About what's the next step? What do we, so I think the front end of the discussion took far longer than we'd actually, than we'd anticipated. So I think there's quite a bit, and I know Lindsay and I have had this conversation about having a conversation about kind of some of the philosophical aspects that both kind of John and Lane have touched on. But in terms on this board, what is it from a House of PMO perspective we can do to help organisations? And I think this is an interesting bit in terms of actually looking at the, you know, the kind of the wider picture of the role of the PMO in a value-driven organisation, to actually the nuts and bolts of actually organisations struggling with how do we deliver projects, and I use that term kind of advisedly, how, you know, kind of delivering on the ground projects using a mixture of waterfall and agile. How best can the House of PMO help these organisations? What would you like us to do? And you know, we'll work very hard to try and make that happen, though miracles do take some time to to facilitate. Water into wine, yes.
Lane's got one there about sharing the metrics.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got some metrics there. We've done some work on metrics, so that perhaps needs another kind of iteration on that. Anything else? Okay. Well, if you do think of anything, do use our LinkedIn group or website, or just if you know Lindy and I's contact details on LinkedIn, get in touch there, because I think this is a subject that we're going to have to come back and revisit a few times before we're clear in terms of how we can provide kind of specific help to the various PMOs who are out there. Thank you very much. I hope you found the conversation useful, and if not useful, then thought stimulating. Certainly has for us. Thank you very much for your contribution. The other 3 sessions, as we've got now, this one's done, we've got resource management, benefits management, and low maturity. And I'm hoping we'll have just as interesting a conversation in those other 3 sections. I'm conscious that we've had lots of sharing in here. Lindsay, as you've seen, is scribbling. She will continue to scribble, and she'll share the results of the final board far and wide based on some of these discussions, but kind of keep your eye on our website, because I'm sure we'll be discussing this subject in its multiple different formats. Thank you all for your contributions, very much appreciated, and we'll see you again.